The Kutasich is Chelik Yud Ches, Bamidbar Beis Sivan, page 18 in the Sefer. Lili Nishmis Rabbi Yosef Ben Yamin Ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman. We all know that Bamidbar is read and learned the Shabbos before Shavuos. We all know that there's a shaykhis, a connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the Yom Tov of Shavuos. In this Sikha, we're going to take a fascinating look at Bamidbar as a hachana to Shavuos, as a preparation to Shavuos, and we're going to focus on three elements that we see in Yidden as they gear up to Matan Torah and what they take away from receiving the Torah, and how that corresponds in Parshas Bamidbar specifically. Says Yodua as Kla'elam Keirin Parshas Bamidbar Sinai Keirim Atzeres. It's known what it says in Shulchan Aruch that Parshas Bamidbar is always read before Shavuos. Excuse me. Since every parsha, as we know, is connected to the time during which it's being read, is move on as the shaykhs of Parshas Bamidbar to Shavuos is beikir in them inyan ha'achana far Chag Shavuos to Matan Torah. So we understand, therefore, that the connection of Bamidbar to Shavuos is in the area of preparing for Shavuos, preparing for receiving the Torah. In contrast to Parshas Nosai, which is usually read after Shavuos, which means to say that Shavuos is in the Shabbos, in the week of Nosai. On occasion, there are certain years that Nosai is read before Shavuos, but most of the time it's read after Shavuos. Is an ear merdi shaychet zu Chag Shavuos und zu Minyan Matan Torah Atzmai. Its connection, Nosai's connection, is more to the receiving of the Torah and to Shavuos, while Bamidbar, as we just explained, is connected more to the preparations for Shavuos, for Matan Torah. Hanal is noch mehr mudgish in der Kviyus von Shana Zu. This would be even more emphasized in the calendar of this year, meaning the year that the Sikha was said and published. When Shabbos Parshas Bamidbar is Chol Beis Sivan, when Shabbos Bamidbar falls out on Beis Sivan, was in dem Tag Omer le Moshe lekacham leTorah. This is the day that Moshe started telling them to get ready, to sanctify them for receiving the Torah. Or in the words of the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, Moshe began to engage with them, to prepare them for receiving the Torah. So Beis Sivan is even more connected to receiving of the Torah. So when Bamidbar falls out on Beis Sivan, it's even a greater connection to preparing for receiving the Torah. We bow das b'chol shana b'chag Shavuos, going back to Chachana in general, not just to Beis Sivan, but since every year on Shavuos, in Zman Matan Torah Seinu, Gid der Eibishter die Torah von das night, the Eibishter gives the Torah anew, unach in a hecheren, eight from the Gabadim Yar Shlifnez, and on a higher level, every year it goes higher and higher. Is move on as far der Kabbalah Torah b'chag Shavuos von dem und jeden Jahr. So it's understood that before we get to Shavuos of this year, similarly to every year, Zainen Neitik di Achanes was Zainen given by Kabbalah Torah b'Bamon. It's necessary to engage in the preparations for Shavuos, for receiving the Torah, as it was in the first year. And this would also be relevant in halacha, as mitam zeh noyagin shalei lisanes shalei lemer tachron berish chedesh, that it is for this reason, because we are involved in preparing for receiving the Torah, therefore we do not fast and we do not say Tachanon during these days between Rish Chedesh and Shavuos. So the question of Seif Aleph is, what is this unique connection between Bamidbar and receiving of the Torah and Shavuos and preparing for receiving of the Torah, specifically Beis Sivan? So Seif Beis is going to go back to this halacha, that we're not supposed to fast or say Tachnun in the first days of Sivan, and we're going to elaborate on that to understand this halacha a little bit better. To understand the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the beginning of getting ready, of preparing ourselves for receiving the Torah, specifically on Beis Sivan and on, we're going to have to first explain this above mentioned halacha about not saying Tachanun or not fasting in the first days of Sivan. Here we're going to quote the Alter Rebbe from Shulchan Aruch about this time. The minig is, the custom is in these countries not to fast and not to say Tachnun from Rosh Chodesh Sivan until Ches Sivan, including Ches Sivan, which is Isru Chag Shavuos. Lefi Shemiyad Achar Rosh Chodesh, immediately after Rosh Chodesh, Hischil Moshe Lisasik Imoyim Binyan Kabbalas HaTorah. This is the quote that we already mentioned in the previous eve. Moshe began to engage with the Yidden to get them ready for Kabbalas HaTorah, receiving the Torah. The Alter Rebbe explains how it actually played itself out, and of course in the Gemara there are different opinions, and the Mefarshim have different opinions in exactly how some of this stuff played out. But this is the Alter Rebbe's Psak in Shulchan Aruch, Shebesheni b'Shabbos on Monday Rosh Chodesh, u'B'Shlishi b'Shabbos on Tuesday was the second day of Sivan. Amar lahem v'atem tiyum mamlachas kohanim v'gemer. This is when Moshe said to the Yidden, "You will be for me a kingdom of kohanim," which we're going to elaborate on throughout the Sikha. What that exactly means. U'B'Revi on Wednesday, which is Gimel Sivan. Amar lemitzvah zakbali, told him the mitzvah of separating themselves staying away from the mountain. Be careful not to go up in the mountain. Ubachamishi on Thursday, which is Dalet Sivan. He told them they should separate from their wives today and the next day, which would be Friday. Hey Sivan. And they should be ready for the third day, which would be Shabbos Vav Sivan, Shehu Shabbos, which was Shabbos, which is the day that the Torah was given. So this all began on Tuesday, Beis Sivan. Therefore, from Beis Sivan and on, it's all days that we are in the heat of the preparation for Shavuos, and therefore there's no fasting and there's no Tachanun. We're now going to ask three questions on this halacha in Alter Rebbe. Aleph. Farvas bringt men, Keidel der Alter Rebbe, die Reihe, als Hischil Moshe lisasik imoyim binyan Kabbalas HaTorah, from Pasig v'atem tiyu mamlechas kohanim v'gemer. Why do many of the Mefarshim, but here specifically the Alter Rebbe, in order to prove that Moshe began preparing the Yidden for Kabbalas HaTorah, which pasuk does he use? The atem ti yulim mlechas kohanim. Why does the Alter Rebbe and the others use this pasuk Beis as b'yem shlishi Beis Sivan saying given asach diburim b'torah gdom l'matan Torah? When this is not the first statement of Moshe Rabbeinu on Beis Sivan, there were others speaking about gearing the people up for Matan Torah that come in the pasuk before the pasuk of atem ti yulim mlechas kohanim. Starting from a previous pasuk, which Nesha says, which Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, this is what you should say to Beis Yaakov, V'sagid livnei Yisrael, and you should tell the Yidden. And this is the intro to the Beis Sivan, to the pasuk V'atem tiyum mamlechas kohanim. So why does the Alter Rebbe bring a pasuk in which Moshe Rabbeinu is very deep into his statement, or the Eibishter is deep into his statement V'atem tiyum mamlechas kohanim? So you might answer that you have seen, and the Eibush is describing how he carried them on the wings of the eagle, etc. Maybe this is about the past, and the Alter Rebbe wants to bring a pasuk of the Eibush. They're speaking about the future. That's not a sufficient answer, because we have such a pasuk as well before the pasuk that we were using. you will be for me a treasure, because the earth is mine, which will explain this pasuk also in the coming pages. But what we see from here is V'yisim li is Hashem speaking about the future, and the Alter Rebbe does not bring that pasuk of V'yisim li Sgula, but he goes to the next pasuk of Atem Tila Mamlechas Kohanim. So what is unique about the pasuk of Mamlechas Kohanim, that is the one that is chosen to prove that Moshe is discussing Matan Torah with the Yidden? Beis Nachmer, this question is a little bit stronger. Im Pshat von Vatem Tilim Mamlechas Kohanim, gefindt man zwei Pirushim. What does it mean, Mamlechas Kohanim? All the Mefarshim ask. Levi is just talking to the Kol Klal Yisrael. They're not just a Shevet Levi. So what does it mean when the Eibush just says, you will be for me a kingdom of Kohanim? So we find two Pirushim. Aleph the Ramban. The Ramban explains, V'tiyu Mamlechas Misharsai, you will be a kingdom of my servants. The Goy Kadosh, Ledavka Bakela Kadosh. And the next end of the pasuk, a holy nation, holy people means a people that is connected with the holy God. That's how the Ramban teaches. Similar to the Mechilta, which says that what the pasuk Mamlechas Kohanim means, that the Yidden were worthy, all of the Yidden were worthy of eating from the karbanos. The Balaturim says Yidden were worthy of being Kohanim Gedolim, both of whom are trying to explain the word Kohanim. How does the word Kohanim fit for people that are not part of Shevet Levi? So the Ramban says, in that vein, he says that it means Misharsai, my servants. You could serve Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash as a Kohen. You could serve Hashem outside the Beis HaMikdash and be referred to as Mamlechas Kohanim. So that's one taich, Kohanim. Kohanim means servants of Hashem. Beis Rashi taich Sarim. But Rashi doesn't use that taich. Later in Sif Gimel we're going to ask why not. But here we're asking a question on the Alter Rebbe. Sarim means officers, ministers. According to the first explanation, the way that Ramban learns, the Kohanim means servants of Hashem. He's moving and das verbunden mit Kabbalah Vesaskes Batera. So we understand how this pasuk connects with the receiving and being involved in Torah, because to sein ibi gegeben, to sein am Mesharas Hashem durch Torah mitzvahs. V'atem tilim Mamlechas Kohanim means you shall be my servant, you should be dedicated to me by being involved in Torah mitzvahs. But according to Rashi and other commentaries that say that the Atem Tiyu Li Mamlechas Kohanim means you will be for me a kingdom of officers, of ministers. What is this pasuk? How does the pasuk connect to receiving the Torah? When the Alter Rebbe says "V'atam tiyu li Mamlechas Kohanim" is a raya that Moshe was talking about Kabbalah Torah, how does crowning the Yidden as officers of Hashem, as ministers of Hashem, how does that prove that that they were talking about receiving the Torah? Gimel. Finally, one last question on this Alter Rebbe. Noch Mamlechas Kohanim is the pasuk mamshech v'gei kadosh. The pasuk continues v'gei kadosh and a holy nation. The Alter Rebbe Aleph is nitmatik diverter. Number one, the Alter Rebbe does not quote these words. He says Mamlechas Kohanim and does not say v'gei kadosh. On the other hand, Beis is aber meramez ivzeh bitten v'geimer. Alter Rebbe does allude to the words v'gei kadosh by saying v'geimer. So why does he? If the words are important, why not mention them? If they're not important, why say v'geimer? So these are our questions on the Alter Rebbe. Why emphasize the pasuk Mamlechas Kohanim, especially according to the fact that Rashi says Mamlechas Kohanim means Sarim? How would the Sarim connect? How would it be a proof from Sarim that this is a Hachana l'Matan Torah? And why does the Alter Rebbe not say v'gei kadosh yet say v'geimar when he brings this pasuk? Gimel. So Gimel, we're going to begin the answer to this question. But first we have a question on Rashi. Why Taka does Rashi say Sarim and not Misharsim, not servants of Hashem, which seems to be much closer to the Pirush HaPashat? And Rashi, as we know, always follows the Pirush HaPashat, the simplest, the most basic understanding. So why learn Sarim? Let's learn the explanations of all this. Meaning to say, what's the connection of Bamidbar and Hachana L'Shvus, and why does the Alter Rebbe use the pasuk Mamlechas Kehanim, especially if it means Sarim, and why does he say V'gei Kaddish and why does he not say V'gei Kaddish and say V'gei Mar? But first we have to introduce the following. L'chedes seemingly not understood. Why does Rashi not explain the words Kehanim Kipshutei literally, that it means servants? You're going to say that Kehanim means Kehanim, not Misharsim. Even Misharsim is maybe not Pirush HaPashat. So he says no. Rashi himself, in an earlier Parshas Vayigash, where it says that Yosef gave special allocations to the Kohanim of Mitzrayim. So Rashi explains, Kol Lashon Kohen Misharas Le'elakusu. Every time you use the word Kohen, it comes from the idea of serving Hashem. That's why the Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash were called Kohanim, because they were serving Hashem. And therefore the priests of Mitzrayim can also be called Kohen, because in their way, they are being Misharis Le'elakus. They're serving Hashem. So Kohanim could mean Misharsim. Und wie says ich mashma in sein Pirush da Gufa, as ein Pirush is a Chiddush. And from Rashi itself, we can understand that to say Sarim is actually a Chiddush. It's actually different than the Pirush HaPashat. Von dem was darf ankommen Saraya v'hechlich as es meint nit Misharsim nor Sarim. From the fact that Rashi has to bring a proof that it doesn't mean Kohanim, but it means Sarim officers. Rashi brings a pasuk and the children of David were Kohanim. Now clearly they weren't Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash because they were from Shevet Yehuda. So therefore it must mean that they were Kohanim, that they were officers, that they were important people. So Rashi brings a proof that Kohanim could mean Sarim. But the fact that Rashi needs to bring a proof means that Kohanim to mean Sarim is not Pirush HaPashat. And in Parshas Vayigash he said that Misharsim is Pirush HaPashat. So the question is, why does Rashi not bring the Taich Kohanim to mean Misharsim, servants of Hashem? V'atirutz. So one answer that we can give is as follows. Demolt, had Rashi said that Kohanim means Misharsim, servants of Hashem, is nicht verstandig, was tut uf, der Pasik, mit dem was says, Mamshech Moshe v'gei Kodesh. What would the Pasik be telling us with the next words of the Gei Kaddish? A Kohen Misharas Lelakus is doch Technik Dusha Avdallah. A Kohen that serves Hashem, meaning to say a person that is being called Kohen because he's serving Hashem, what's the idea? That he is Kiddush, he's holy. What does holy mean? Removed from the world. Derech Mashenemar v'yavdil Aaron le'agdishay geimer hu ubanav. As the pasuk says, v'yavdil Aaron, Aaron was separated, removed, to sanctify him and his children. So the idea of serving Hashem, becoming a Kohen, is the idea of Kiddusha, of removing oneself from the world to become holy for Hashem. So that would be repetitive. That would just be saying the same thing again. You should be Kohanim for me, meaning you serve me. What does it mean, my Kohanim? To separate yourself from the world, to serve Hashem. V'gei Kaddish. It's repetitious. From them was the pasuk is Moshe v'gei Kaddish. The fact that the pasuk says v'gei Kaddish, in addition to Mamlechas Kehanim, is moving as Mamlechas Kehanim da, that it need gemeint in from Kedusha Avdallah zum Eibishter. Therefore, we conclude that Mamlechas Kehanim cannot mean the idea of separating, designating oneself to become holy to the Eibishter, because that's already understood in V'gei Kaddish. The Rebbe learned Rashi as the Taishu Mamlechas Kehanim da is need with the Lashon Kahuna v'Ketach Kiragil. Therefore, Rashi says here Kahuna cannot mean the regular explanation of Kahuna, which would mean servants of Hashem. Nor Sarim, it must have a unique, different explanation. It means Sarim, officers, ministers, and that's a different explanation than Gei Kaddish. So this answers our question, our last question. Why does Rashi not say Kohanim means Misharsei Hashem? Because Misharsei Hashem is included in Gei Kaddish. Goy Kadosh means to elevate oneself, to remove oneself from the world, to become holy to Hashem, and that is done by being Misharsei Hashem, servants of Hashem, and therefore Rashi says Malachas Kenim has to mean something different. And therefore Rashi concludes that it must be Sarim, like the pasuk of Nei David Kayanim Hoy. So now that we understand what is meant by Mamlechas Kayanim as Sarim, is the Seder from the Drei Meiles and the Psukim Zula Meile Mizu. Then you have three Psukim here, V'yisim Lizgula, Mamlechas Kayanim, and Goy Kadosh, describing three unique qualities of the Yidden, but they are being listed in an order, one greater than the next. V'yisim Lizgula Mikol Ha'amim, Is das was Eden seinen Anetzer Chaviv refers to the fact that Yidden are a precious treasure. Getelt from Shara Uma is removed from other nations, different than other nations. That's one level. Before you touch anything, a Yid by definition is different than the rest of the world. He is the Abish's precious treasure. The noch is Meisiv, then the pasuk adds, as nitnar zayin as zgulim mikolamim. Not only are they more precious than the other nations, a treasure, nor the in Sarim, they are also officers. But Sarim herrschen unfirin on with their medina. Sarim are a rule, herrschen, they rule. Unfirin on, and they lead the country midamarum with their surroundings. So not only are they precious, they are also leaders. The noch is the Yisaf of a Goy Kadosh, and the pasuk says one more thing, that they are a holy people, as Eden Zayin and Gansen moved the Lunuf Kevin from Chayil, that they are removed and elevated above the mundane, from the Gansen room above their surroundings, from calling from the worldly matters. Goy Kadosh, from Abish Nevel Derech V'Kenim Kipshute, they are a holy people, holy for the Abish, that's similar to Kenim, literally that are designated away from the rest of the people to be holy for Hashem. So you have three levels. You have a precious treasure. You have the fact that they are leading the world, that they are the ones that are in power. And then you have the fact that they are above the world, higher than the world, not even engaged in the world. So these three psukim, before we even go a little bit weiter to understand this better, we already see that these three psukim, the Eibushter is telling Moshe Rabbeinu three qualities of the Yidden, each one, as they get listed, higher and higher. In Daled, Siv Daled is going to explain these three levels, but on a deeper level and on a more personal level. These three ideas, as they are on a deeper level and as they are in the person's Aveda, is as follows. First pasuk is, you will be my treasure. So Ma'alim Ershton is the first and most important aspect of the preciousness of Yidden is that the Eibusher chose them. Which the Eibusher chose the Yidden during Matan Torah. At the time of Matan Torah, this time, what happens is the Yidden become the chosen people. True choice comes solely from the chooser. Sie ist nicht muchrig durch or verbunden mit der Meile V'Yisem von dem Nifcher. True choice is not connected or is not based upon the quality of the chosen. Das was der Eibishter, one second, just so we all understand this, we discussed this concept of the Eibishter's Bechira in the past. If you're choosing two things that are different one from another, an apple and an orange. So if you like apples better than oranges, then it's not a real choice. You like apples better. When you call it a choice, when the two things that are being chosen are identical, and the choice comes not because of the quality of one over the other, but because of the desire of the chooser. In this case, the Eibishter. Das, was der Eibishter ist, Beiche de Iden, ist verbunden mit der Samadrege, wo es ist Kachasheichel Keira, und befragt bin Negea la Kabbalas Ashpo und Nochecher. The part of the Eibishter that's choosing the Yidden is coming from a place where dark and light is equal, which means that the Eibishter on that level does not see the difference between good and bad, the difference between a Yid or not a Yid. And therefore, der Chiluk zwischen Eden and Numas Elam is nicht die Sibeiknis from Chis Bnei Yisrael. The fact that there is a difference between Yidden and the nations of the world is not the reason why the Eibusher chooses Yidden. The Eibusher chooses Yidden because of his Atzmos. Because Be'etzem, the Eibusher wants Yidden despite their Milas. Ubelashon Rashi. As Rashi says, don't say that that you're the only one. I have no others beside you. No, it's different. There are others, but I, the Eibishter, chose Yidden, and therefore and therefore, because I chose, not because they don't exist, they exist, but nevertheless, I chose that the nations of the world should be in my eyes as nothing, and the Yidden should have that their preciousness, the love that the Eibishter has to them should be recognized, should be obvious, should be seen. So that's the first level. V'yisim li zgula. The Eibishter mitzad atzmusa yizbarech was Beicher, chose Klal Yisrael, and therefore we are an Eitzer Chaviv, we are a precious treasure. Then comes the fact that the Yidden work. The Yidden accomplish something through their own Avodah. Which, in a more general sense, Avodah of Yidden are divided in two levels. Aleph, the Avodah in Divrei Reshus. Number one, there's the person's engagement, involvement in non-mandatory and mundane matters, which, when he does it l'shem shamayim, when he does something mundane with the ultimate intention that this is for the sake of Hashem, or that in the very thing that he's doing, taking a physical thing and using it for kedusha. So you're using the material world for holiness. So that's the Avodah of a Yid, to engage in the physical world in a holy manner. Beis. Then you have an even higher level, the Avodah of a Yid in Limud HaTorah v'Kiyum mitzvahs, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. And how does these last two connect to Mamlechas Kohanim and Tegei Kodesh? Und das ist der Chilik zwischen der Meile von Kohanim und Sharsi Hashem, wie sie wird geteilt bechol Mokim, oder wie der Pasuk sagt, da Gei Kodesh. And this will be the difference between Kohanim and Sharsi Hashem, which usually we explain that Kohanim means serving Hashem, but over here, that's going to fit into the category of Gei Kodesh. Und der Meile von Mamlechas Kohanim Sarim. We're not going to go through this every time we mention this, so I'm going to just point it out over here. That we're going to talk about Kohanim as Misharsei Hashem, which here fits into the category of Gei Kodesh, and we're going to talk about Kohanim, which means Sarim, which is Mamlechas Kohanim. So Kohanim has two meanings. Kohanim could mean serving Hashem. Kohanim can mean officers. So here you have Mamlechas Kohanim, which means Sarim. And then you have Gei Kodesh, which means Misharsei Hashem, which can also be used as the word Kohanim. So it could become a little bit confusing. So it's important so most of the time we're going to stick to the words Sarim and Misharsei Hashem, so that we know which one we're talking about. But based on the fact that there's two types of Avodah in Inyanei Reshus, Avodah in non-mandatory matters, and the Avodah of learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvahs, these two things will be reflected in Sarim, which is the translation of Kohanim in this case, and Misharsei Hashem, which is the translation of Gei Kodesh in our Psukim. The Avodah in Yanei Kedusha, Belimud HaTorah v'Kiyum mitzvahs, is in an even fun as when it's getan from Chel from Welt. When you engage in the matters of holiness, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, it is in a manner that you are removed from the mundane world. But thus is similar to the Kohanim who stood before Hashem away from the world to serve Him. Since they're removed from the world, their inheritance, their portion is the Eibishter, of their entire being, their entire essence. Islam and was mitzadem werden Eden angerufen Gei Kodesh. Sie sind Mishor Sai, my servants. They're serving me. They're moved away from the world. The Gei Kodesh, and they're holy people. The Dafka Bekela Kodesh, to bond, to connect, to cleave to the holy Hashem. Durch Torah mitzvahs, through Torah mitzvahs. This is the higher level. Mitzad der Aveda in Divrei Reshus, but when the Yidden do their Aveda in the non-mandatory and the mundane world, that everything that a person does, even material things, are ultimately for the purpose of the Eibishter, of serving Hashem. Or that the very thing that he's doing, he's using a material thing to serve Hashem. Vibalda says, It's your deeds and it's your ways. It's the eyu. It's the knowing Hashem. It's l'shem shemayim, but it's called masecha and it's called rechacha. They are not holy engagements. They are involvements. They're the shus, non-mandatory, mundane. Then in this case, Yidden are called Sarim officers. Was weist auf der Schlitte und Anführung von Yidden mit Sachen von der Welt, which represents the fact that Yidden are ruling and leading, conducting the world. For the Yidden of Shaykhs to the world, they're called Masecha. Why is it called Masecha? Because Yidden are involved in worldly matters. Die Aveda is a Fana Nitruch sein Uskitam Welt. Is expressed not through removing oneself from the world, nor beikar zu shelet sein und anfinden mit Nane Elam, to control the world and to lead the world. To utilize the material matters for the Eibishter's sake. To the point that they too will represent Elokus, the Eyu, you know Hashem in them. As they are refined and purified, they become part of holiness, vessels to contain godliness. So you have the Yisimli Zgula. This refers to the Bechira of the Eibishter in the Yidden, which the Goyim exist, but nevertheless the Eibishter chooses the Yidden. And then you have Mamlechas Kayanim, which Kayanim means officers, referring to the Aveda of the Yidden with the world, to elevate the world and to transform the world, to turn the material world into something holy. And then you have a Goy Kodesh, which refers to serving Hashem, which is removing oneself from the world and becoming closer to Hashem through Teiro mitzvahs. This, if you noticed, right in the beginning of page 22, he says, Bichlolus telt sich in zwei Efanim. More generally speaking, Sarim and Misharsi Hashem is two types of Aved Vayid, Rishus and Kedusha. In Sifei is going to say that Bepratius, more specifically, we could say that in Limud HaTeirah V'Kiyum Mitzvahs Gufa, there is both aspects of Sarim and Misharsi Hashem. Das is Bichlolus in Sifei. Das is Bichlolus. This is in a more general sense. The Pratis is Eichin der Avede von Kiyum HaMitzvahs Veran die Zwei Efanim Titnu Zwei Efanim. More detailed level, more specifically within Teiro mitzvahs, you also have these two modes of Aveda. Aleph learn Teiro is Mekayim mitzvahs b'chtei ladavka b'yizbarach. He's learning Teira and doing mitzvahs in order to cleave, to connect to Hashem. Well, it says the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, it is impossible to properly connect to Hashem unless one fulfills the 248 mitzvahs, which correspond to the 248 limbs of the king of the Eibishter Kiviyachal. The reason why he's learning Torah and doing mitzvahs is because he wants to be a servant of Hashem. That in Kaddish moved from Welt to become holy and separated from the world. Goy Kaddish. Beis, another level, that Esek HaTorah v'Kiyum mitzvahs is b'chtei peil sein av gufei v'nafshei abahamas v'chalke b'elam. To machen to from Welt adir leis barach b'tachtenu. The reason why he's learning Torah and doing mitzvahs is for the sake of impacting his own guf, his own nefesh abamis, his part of the world in a more greater picture, to make a direles barach bitachtena, that in the physical world there should be a dwelling place for Hashem. Here he's not removed from the world, he's engaged in the world for the purpose of transforming the world. This is the idea of Sarim, impacting the world. So not only do we see that there's a Yani Rishus, which is Sarim, and Teiro Mitzvahs, which is Misharsi Hashem, which is service to Hashem, but Pratius, Sarim is when a person learns Torah for the sake of impacting himself and the world, and Misharsi Hashem is when a person learns Torah for the sake of connecting to the Eibishter. In Sivav, we're now going to go and talk about based on this, we now understand why Rashi uses the word Sarim and not Misharsei Hashem, we're now going to understand the connection of the pasuk Mamlachas Koyanim and Matan Torah, which was part of our question. We're also going to understand why the Alter Rebbe uses the word V'Goymar instead of saying V'Goy Kodesh. In the Pirush Rashi, based on this, we can understand. According to the Pashtup Pshat of Rashi, we already explained that Mamlechas Koyanim, he says, means Sarim, because otherwise it would be repetitive to the Goy Kodesh. To take it into Yena Shel Torah, into deeper elements of Torah in a more practical way of understanding this. Why does Rashi teach Mamlechas Koyanim Sarim? We need to become Mekemes Kipshutim Misharsei Hashem. Why does Rashi teach that Mamlechas Koyanim means Sarim, officers, and not, as he would usually do, that it means Koyanim serving Hashem? And for this, in order to do this, we have to introduce this very famous Gemara Peches, which discusses Matan Torah, and something that has been discussed in many of the Rebbe Sichos. What was the uftu? What was the accomplishment of Matan Torah in this world? The Gemara says in this section of in the Gemara where it discusses Matan Torah, when Moshe went up to heaven, the angels said to the Eibishter, what is a human being doing amongst us? Omar Lahen, the Eibishter answered, Kabel Torah ba, he came to receive the Torah. Omru Lefanov, so the Malachim said back, Chamuda Gnuza v'chulu, atam vakesh litno the bas of Adam, ma enish kisis kirenut, na'it chala shamayim. You have this hidden treasure, the Torah, that you have for so many years. Now you're going to give it away to the human beings. Why would you give any significance to the human? Why not place your glory upon the heavens? Meaning to say, give the Torah to the Malachim. Give them a response. Reply to them. Omar Lefanov. So the Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Eibishter, the Torah that you're giving me, what does it say in it? I am the Eibishter that took you out of Mitzrayim. Omar Lehen. So Moshe turns to the angels and he says, did you actually descend to Egypt? Were you enslaved to Paray? Why should we give you the Torah? Shuv Maksiva. What else does it say in the Torah? You should not have any other gods besides for the Eibishter. Are you living amongst the nations that there's any thought or possibility that you will worship other gods? And similar to this, Moshe responds to the Malachim with regards to the other commandments of the Aseres HaDibreis. Do you do malacha? Do you do business? Do you have a father and mother? Do you have jealousy amongst you? Do you have a Yitzhara amongst you? So the angels, the Malachim, admitted to the Eibishter the Torah belongs with the Yidden in this world. From this we can understand. As the Mechuven von der Sinnes HaTorah v'Mitzvahs is nicht bloß as Eden sollen sein abgesundet von Yonei Elam, Melacha Maso Matan. The ultimate purpose of giving of the Torah was not for the Yidden to be removed or separated from worldly matters, that they shouldn't engage in commerce, they shouldn't engage in business. Der Indian is v'ran b'malachim, because that idea, the idea of being removed from the world, already exists by the angels. And in a more perfect way, then it could work itself out for a Yid here. However you look at it, even a Yid who's removed from the world still has to eat, still has to drink, still has to sleep, something. There still has to be some level of engagement in the physical world. Malachim are perfectly removed from the world. So if the Eibishter wanted that through Torah, a person should be removed from the world entirely, he would have given the Torah to the Malachim. Nor be'ikir. What was the purpose of giving the Torah? Primarily, as gefinim zich dalamata, that those who exist down here in this world, and are involved with the other nations, and worldly matters, to the point that we have a Yitzhara. The purpose of Matan Torah was that with the engagement with the world, with the engagement with the nations of the world, with the Yetzirah, a Yid should be a Sar, an officer, someone who's in control of the world. A Yid should be in control of the Yetzirah and of his midos, of his character traits. And also with regards to the world. And he is a Sar, he is in control controlling, leading the world. They should be refined and permeated with godliness. Which is the Aveda of serving Hashem and with all of our actions. And then in all of our ways that we go, we should know Hashem. It means engaging with the world and taking control of the world to bring Elokus, godliness, into the world. That is the goal of Matan Torah. That is the purpose of Matan Torah. Not to stay away from the world, but to involve oneself in the world, but from a position of control. Not a position of becoming influenced by the world, but a position of controlling and changing and transforming the world. Bichlolus, generally speaking, this is the accomplishment, this is what was different. The advantage of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs after Matan Torah, after Kiyum Torah mitzvahs from the Avis, over the Torah mitzvahs that were done by the Avis, was Kiyum kol Avis kol Torah kulash lenitna, which we know from the Gemara that the Avis, the forefathers, fulfilled all of the mitzvahs of the Torah before it was even given. We also know from other Amar Chazal that the Avis learned Torah. So what's the difference? It's another idea that we've discussed in the past. But here in this sikha, he's approaching it from a specific perspective that is negeya for us to understand the mahalach, the flow of what we're talking about here. The purpose of the Avis fulfilling Torah mitzvahs was not so that they can refine and elevate the physicality of the world, nor to become and to remain one with Hashem. The Avis were a chariot of Hashem. A chariot is a euphemism for total bittul, total dedication to Hashem, like a chariot that does exactly what the rider tells it to do. Similarly, the Avis had no will of their own. They were totally dedicated in a total bittul to the Eibishter. When we talk in Tanya, similar to the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, all of their limbs were holy and removed from worldly matters. They were only a chariot to the Eibishter's divine will. Therefore, even the things that they did do in this world were that they were shepherds, which Chassidus explains many times. Shepherd represents being removed from the world, going to war, engaging in business. Those would be occupations that involve the person in the world. The shepherd is someone who goes into the forest and sits there all day watching the sheep and does not have to engage in the worldly matters. So the Avis B'Rayetzain, which shows on an aloofness, on a being removed from the world. But after the Eibishter gave the Torah, the idea wasn't not to be removed from the world. The idea was to engage in the world and rule the world and change the world. Und der Dibur lernt Rashi, as in dem Dibur Havaya, wegen der Aveda von Yidden B'Shayachas Matan Torah, when the Eibishter speaks about the Aveda of Yidden with regards to Matan Torah, is frier die Darges Aveda von Sarim. The first thing you have to say is Yidden Sarim. The first, because it's the most important aspect of Matan Torah, that Yidden are Sarim, Yidden are taking control of the world. Only after that can you speak about Gei Kadosh, that on their own they also elevate themselves to connect to Hashem and remove themselves from the world. So this Alpi Yedishal Torah is the answer to our question from the beginning of Seif Gimel. Why does Rashi choose Sarim, which is not Kipshutei? The answer is because since the whole purpose of Matan Torah is that a Yid should change the world, therefore the first and most important part here is Sarim, to be in control of the world. Der Mitte sich moving was the Alter Rebbe b'Shulchanoi. Sagen dik as miyad achar ish chedesh. This explains why the Alter Rebbe, when he wants to prove that Moshe began to teach the Yidden, to prepare the Yidden for Matan Torah, bringt them pasuk b'shlishi b'Shabbos. Amar lavadam tilim lechaskeinu, that on Tuesday, Beis Sivan, the Eibishter told the Yidden that you will be for me a Mamlechas Kehanim. Und die Werte, which is one question, why this pasuk? Und die Werte v'gei Kodesh is there place merames with v'geimer, and another question was that the Alter Rebbe does not mention the words v'gei Kodesh, but alludes to them with a v'geimer. Lahadgish, to emphasize, as v'atem tilim Mamlechas Kehanim is a bazunder sug und darge in Aveda, that Mamlechas Kehanim is its own unique category of serving Hashem. Und V'gei Kodesh is a zweite Darge, and V'gei Kodesh is a second a level of a hemshich ugmar from the Friedike, but a follow-up, but it is a continuation to the previous. And then, and in Mamlechas Kehanim, the first category of Aveda. This is what Matan Torah consists of. The Ribber is the Erste Yisaskus Ischil Meshel Yisasek Iman Binyan Kabbalah Satera given them as Amalei Matan Tilam Lechas Kehanim. The Moshe is beginning what Moshe begins to talk to them about Kabbalah Satera. The first thing he speaks to them is about Lechas Kehanim, which means Sarim, officers, being involved in the world, but in a way of controlling the world and changing the world, because that's the ultimate purpose of Matan Torah. As the Iker Mechuf Kabbalah Satera is in the Aveda of Matan Tilim Lechas Kehanim. The Iker Aveda of receiving the Torah is to be Lechas Kehanim, to take control of the world and elevate it and transform it to Kedusha. The Darge of V'gei Kodesh is V'geimar, but the level of V'gei Kodesh is mentioned as a V'geimar. To them kum mensu. First of all, it says it's not mentioned together to know that it's another level. But it says V'geimar, to them kum mensu, und das ist der Geimer, the Aveda of Lechas Kehanim. This can be reached. And this concludes the Aveda Mamlechas Kehanim. Once a Yid is changing the world, is doing the ultimate purpose Matan Torah, which is to transform and elevate the world, then V'gei Kodesh, then he can also be a holy nation. He can also be someone that removes himself from the world and connects to the Eibishter. So up until this point, we have answered our three questions on the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Our first question was, why does he bring the pasuk V'atem Tilim Mamlechas Kehanim? And the answer is because Mamlechas Kehanim is the ikir mechuven, the primary purpose of the giving of the Torah, that a Yid should be a Kohen. Sarim, this answers our second question. What does Mamlechas Kehanim? How does the connection of Sarim to Matan Torah? Because the idea of Matan Torah is that a Yid should be a Saru Moshel V'Shelet, should rule over the world and over himself, and the Torah should impact him and the world. And also the third question, why does it say Mamlechas Kehanim V'geimer, to tell us that the V'gei Kodesh is a separate level of Mamlechas Kehanim, and it is a continuation to a Geimer, to Mamlechas Kehanim. The word V'geimer means, and its conclusion. When you say a pasuk, Mamlechas Kehanim V'geimer, the word V'geimer refers to the conclusion of the pasuk. So here, in the deeper understanding of it, it refers to the conclusion of the fact that a Yid is a Sar, Moshel V'Shelet, a ruler to the world, that he could also become a Gei Kodesh. Now let's apply this to Parshas Bamidbar. Now that we understand what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying as he was preparing them to Matan Torah, telling them that the ultimate goal of purpose of Matan Torah is to prepare oneself for, is to change the world. Now we can understand the connection to Parshas Bamidbar. The Teichem in the Parsha is Minyan B'nai Yisrael. The theme of the Parsha is the censuses of the Yidden. These are the ganze Sefer v'Tangruf and Chumash Abkudim, to the point that the whole Chumash is called the Book of Numbers. Prat is Retzach in der Parsha wegen drei besondere Zählungen on a more detailed level. This Parsha recounts three censuses. The beginning of the Seder, where we count all of the Yidden, excluding the Levium, not to count the Shevet Levi. Then the Shevet Levi is counted on its own, just the Shevet Levi, all those members of the tribe, starting from the age of 30 days old. And then at the end of the Seder, count the heads of the family of Kahas, from the age of 30 years old. He was counting those who were fit for the avodah of carrying the Mishkan. As the drei proti aminions and bedugma to the drei inyanim anal, v'yisem li zgula mikolamim, the atem tiyu li mamlechas kehanim, and v'gei kadosh. We might suggest that the three censuses in our Parshas Bamidbar correspond to the three levels that we've been discussing earlier in the Sikha of Yisem Liskula, treasure to the Eibishter, Mamlechas Koyanim, officers, rulers of the world, and the Goy Kodesh, removing oneself from the world to connect to Hashem. And this is the explanation. Steht in Shalom, as durch dem, was man hat gezählt, die Iden, seien sie geworden, a Davar Shebeminyan, das Davar Shebeminyan lei batel. Shalom says that by the counting the Yidden became something that's countable, and because of that, they fell into the category. They are in the category of what Allah tells us, that something that's counted cannot become batal, cannot become nullified. Normally speaking, you have a concept of bittul beroiv or bittul b'shishim, that if something that's aser falls into something that's mutter, but there's 60 times more mutter than aser, then the aser becomes batal, becomes part of the mutter, and this mixture is permissible. There are exclusions to that. The exclusions to that is something that is of importance by itself. Then even though it got mixed into the mixture, it does not become batul. One of the ways that something does not become batul is if it's countable. For example, you have a dozen eggs. Eggs are traded, are bought by number, by dozen, and therefore it's called a davar shebeminyan. And if an egg falls, it gets mixed in with a bunch of other eggs, it would not become batul. So when the Yid are counted, it gives them that chashivus, that distinction, that importance, that they do not become batul. That's what's a davar shebeminyan batul, and he says like this, very interesting. The fact that something that's counted cannot become batul is nicht in themselves even the andere dvarim chshuvim vernit batul is different than the fact that there are other things of importance that do not become batul. Viberia, like something that is its own creation. The example that the Rambam brings from the Gemara is a gidanosha. If a gidanosha gets mixed in with other gidon, because a gidanosha is a beria b'fnei atzmai, it's its own creation, therefore it does not become batul. Bali chayim, or entire animals. For example, a shayra nisko, an ox that has to be stoned, that gets mixed in with other oxen, or an egla arufa, a calf that's being used for the egla arufa that gets mixed in with other calves, or a tziper, a bird that was designated to be used for the mitzvah, and it got mixed in with other birds. Since they are an entire balchai, they're not batul. But dartin is the chshivus and the zachufa begali. Over there, these things, the very thing themselves, because it's a whole animal or a whole beria, a whole piece of creation, therefore it has its own importance inherently. These anders begolif and andere Sachen, they are different, they are distinct from other things. In contrast to that, something that is being counted, and because of that is not batul. It's only once it's counted do we discover its importance. And because of that it's not batul. Inherently we don't see its importance. It's only once it becomes counted that we discover that this is an important thing, a thing that should not become batul. So let's parallel this in the spiritual sense. Counting the Yidden represents this uniqueness of Yidden as they are externally not any different than the other nations. Then it bottle is mitzad v'dem was the Rebbe says meina isam. Basement therefore is eine chaviv. The fact that Yidden are not bottle, don't get mixed in with the other nations, is not because they are inherently different, but rather it's because they get counted by the Eibishter, and that makes them different. That gives them the chashivus, the importance that they should not get mixed in with the other nations. Therefore, is that inyan and minyan bedugmas isem liskul mikol am mikol aretz, and therefore we can correspond the idea of this counting, the counting of all of the Yidden, with the idea of the pasuk, you'll be a treasure for me from amongst all the nations, because all of the world is mine. Even though the whole world is mine, the Eibishter is saying, there are others here besides for you. Nevertheless, the Yidden are distinct. Yidden are special because the Eibishter chose them, and they do not become but they now become insignificant compared to the other nations. Which becomes revealed through the senses, which causes that their preciousness should become obvious. As Rashi says in the beginning of the parsha, in the front of because the Eibishter loves them, therefore he counts them constantly. Whereas Rashi says in the beginning of Parsha Shmeis, to let it be known that the Eibishter loves them. So if we're comparing the three censuses to the three levels that we explain, and milas and qualities of the Yidden, the counting of all of the Yidden, which is for the purpose of revealing their preciousness from amongst all the nations, corresponds to v'yisem lisgula mikol ha'amim. That even though there's amim and likol ha'aretz, nevertheless he counts the Yidden because they are his oitzer chavav, they are his precious treasure. B'hemshech lazeh is a pasuk madgish. Achasmat Levi leisivke Yisrael leisisab seich b'nei Yisrael. The pasuk says, do not count the tribe of Levi amongst the rest of the Yidden. Warum zeir minyan is verbunden nicht nur mit dem was is an ausgeteilt und werden nicht battel. Because this count, this census, is connected not just with the fact that they are counted and therefore not battle. Appoint the Levium. Lashon minu Yisrara, which is the hafked, is from the term of appointing one to a position, an important position. They're being counted into their own VIP category, into their own special definition. Das was noch dem Shevet Levi gezählt mit Chedes v'mayla is weil durch dem und nimno likare Shem Mishperes HaKedesh. The fact that they were being counted from the age of 1 month is because he was being counted to be called a guard in the Mishperes HaKedesh, in the royal guard, in the holy guard. Bedugma se'ilik from the atom tilim lechas kelim sarim b'neisa of them was a very nit bottle v'yisim lizgula, which this will correspond to mamlechas ke'an, which means sarim. The Leviim were being given a position of the royal guard, a VIP position, which corresponds to the idea of sarim, that not only they're not bottle legabi the other nations, but they actually are in a leadership position. And then comes the third census, where they counted the specific families of Gershon and Merari. Which started the census began at the age of 30. Here they were being drafted to do malacha in the Oyel Moed in the Mishkan. The Parsha Seinu state their meaning for Bnei Kahas, and in our Parsha it focuses on Kahas because Gershon and Merari are in our Parshas Naseh. But it's verbunden with Avedas Bnei Kahas by Oyel Moed Kedesh HaKadoshim. Not only did they do Aveda in the Oyel Moed, the Bnei Kahas did the Aveda also in the Kedesh HaKadoshim. They were carrying the Mishkan. They were carrying the Aron HaKodesh, which is from the Kedesh HaKadoshim. Their minyan is nit mitzad their klalas dik tafkid from the Leviim. This census is not because of the general position of the Leviim, the Yisrara from Shemei Mishperes HaKodesh being in this leadership position of being part of the royal guard. Nor mitzad malacha be'oyel moyed. Ba b'nei kahas mitzad dem was b'nei kahas an uzgetelt as utragin the klei HaKodesh HaMekudesh b'kulam. And this is because the Malacha was in the Oyel Moed itself. And in the case of Bnei Kahas, they were carrying the actual holy vessels, the Shulchan, the Menorah, the Aron, etc., which were the holiest of all of the Kelim. Which this would correspond to the quality of the Goy Kodesh. B'Parsha Seinu is there meaning for Bnei Kahas to leave Avedas HaKedesh, Nesiyas Aron HaMekudesh B'kulam. As es ist euch verbunden und scheich mit dem was Kehanim seinen von Bnei Kahas und Yatzam imenu Aron HaKodesh u'Kedesh HaKadoshim. So first of all, in general, the idea that they were doing the Aveda in the Oyel Moed, they were doing the holiest Aveda, this connects to the Gei Kodesh. Additionally, our parsha focuses on Bnei Kahas, which is the family from which Aaron HaKohen came, and from which all of the Kohanim come, because there are also Leviim that come from Shevet Levi, which was Gershon and Merari. So this shows an even higher level within Shevet Levi Gufa, the fact that they actually became Kohanim, real Kohanim, not just Mesharsei Hashem, but actual Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. So the three censuses refer to the three milas. The first census of all of the Yidden is the idea of Yisim Lizgula, the fact that through counting the Yidden they become a Davar Chashiv. This represents the preciousness of Bnei Yisrael, and they become Loi Batum. Then you have the census of Shevet Levi, the whole Shevet Levi. This refers to the fact that they are Va'ata Hafke, they are given a position of Sarara, an important position which corresponds to Mamlechas Keren, in which we've been teaching all along, means Sarim. Then you have the Shevet, this counting of the Bnei Kahas, which were with Hamikudas B'Shebekulan, which number one represents the fact that they were Goy Kadosh, that they are uniquely connected to Hashem. It also touches upon the fact that this is uniquely connected to Bnei Kahas, which actually was the forebearer of the Koyanim in the Beis Hamikdash. So this answers the question: what is the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the Hachana L'Matan Torah? Because in the Hachana L'Matan Torah, the Eibishter recounts the different milas of Bnei Yisrael, and in Parshas Bamidbar, he tells us to count the Yidden 3 different times, corresponding to the 3 different qualities of Yidden. In Sif Yud Aleph is going to explain that of the 3 censuses, which one is the most unique to our parsha, the middle one. The one that is the counting of Shevet Levi Miben Chedesh V'Mayla, which, as we said, is the level of Sarim, which is Mamlechas Koyanim, which will explain again why Mamlechas Koyanim is so important with regards to Kabbalah Satira. Talking about Hachana, the Kabbalah Satira, he's going to explain why this census out of all of them is the most unique to our parsha. As we said earlier, that the primary Hachanat Matan Torah is represented in the pasuk of Amlachas Keren, which means Sarim. Al derech zazet men now, as the Chiddush Miyuchav of Parshas Bamidbar is Minyan Bnei Levi. Similarly to that, we'll see that which one is the most unique census to Parshas Bamidbar, the counting of Bnei Levi. The Minyan for Kol Bnei Yisrael is nit kein Inyan versus Bertnis Chalas Nufkiton Ershton und Zasadr. The count, the census of all of the Yidden is not something that is brought up for the first time or accomplished in this Seder. The Yidden have previously been counted. Rashi says that when they went out of Mitzrayim, the Eibishter counted them. And then again, he counted them after the Egel Azov. And now again he counts them. That it is because the Eibishter loves them, he counts them at all times. This is already the 3rd census. So you can't say that this parsha, the unique chiddush of this parsha, is the fact that the Eibishter counts the Yidden. Also the 3rd one, which is the census of the family of Kahas, is nicht in ganzen verbunden with Parshas Bamidbar, is not uniquely, entirely connected with Parshas Bamidbar. Even though Bnei Kahas were unique in their Aveda, because they were carrying the Hamikudash Shebekul and the holiest vessels. The way they were counted, the fact that they were counted from the age of 30 and on, is the same thing as the other Bnei Levi. When I feel that Aveda from Bnei Kahas, Avedas Masa, even the idea that they were carrying things, the way they carried things is Bnei Gershon, is also by the family of Gershon. Beis as the Nose is Reish Bnei Kahas B'Sav Parshaseinu. So much so that the census that we have at the end of our parsha to count the Bnei Kahas is the Haschala from the Hemshech Ha'inyan in the Seder Shalachar is Nose is Reish Bnei Gershon Gameim is only a beginning to a continuation that continues into Parshas Nase, where it says count the family of Gershon Gameim, also them. They were also part of this special census. So the count of Bnei Kahas is not unique to this parsha, because also Gershon and Merari were counted, and even though Merari is not as holy as Bnei Gershon, because they carried the Chatzar, but also Bnei Gershon is considered Kodesh, holy. Not as holy as Kahas, but still considered holy. And therefore, Kahas is just an introduction, the census of Kahas is part of the following censuses of Gershon and Merari. So therefore it's not unique to this parsha. The chilek und inyan ha-miyuchat in Parshas Bamidbar is the minyan und der tafkid from Klal Shevet Levi. the most unique census in this parsha is the census of the whole Shevet Levi. Thus was the Eibishter the Levi Memanik Ven Zayin Tachas Kol B'Chei B'Nei Yisrael. The fact that the Eibishter counted and appointed Bnei Levi to take the place of the B'Chei of the firstborn. Stot Kol B'Chei der Eshter und Anführer von alle Kinder Lekeach Pishnayim bei Yerusha, instead of the B'Chei, the firstborn, who's considered the first and the leader of the rest of the children of his family, and he would take a double portion of the Yerusha. Was in dem alam is doch da aveda la'avaya from the B'chei B'nei Yisrael, which all these represent also the fact that when we serve Hashem, it has to be done in a manner of firstborn. So the Bnei Levi took this place. They became the B'cheirim. They received this leadership position. Valkinal, as we mentioned earlier, that Ikiru Matar of Matan Teid is V'atam Tiyil in Lechas Kenim Sorim. So Shelet Zayin Avinyani Ha'elam and Onfirim Mitzay Peil Zayin Azezol and Vera Dirle Yisbarach, because the most important purpose of Matan Teid is to become Sorim, to become leaders of the world, to impact the world and to change the world, to make a Dira B'Tachtenim, and therefore the census that is mostly connected with the idea of Sorim is the most unique to this parsha. Counting of Shevet Levi, which made them Sarim. Every year, when these days are remembered, and every Yid is involved in the Aveda of becoming a Mamlachas Kehanim Sarim, officers of the Eibishter, this will also accomplish the literal idea of Mamlachas Kehanim, till in the most literal sense, that they will have Kehanim serving Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash. Eden werden Sarim of Kol Inyanei Elam, Eden become officers in control of all of the worldly matters. That they bring down the Sarim of above, that they should be in control of the world. That the Nachzayndik in Golos, that while we're still in Golos, the other kings will be our helpers, and ministers, female ministers, will be the wet nurses of our children. And that way we could get ready to receive the Torah with simcha, with joy, and in an innermost way, as the Frierdiker Rebbe and later on the Rebbe would very often wish with regards to the Yom Tov of Shavuos. And this will lead us to be able to, in the very near future, learn the Torah of Mashiach. That the Eibishter will be the king on all of the world, even worldliness. Then the Eibishter will be the king because the Sarim, because Yidden became Sarim, Yidden became the officers of the world to change the world and prepare it for the Eibishter's kingdom. B'mheirav Yameinu Mamash.